Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you back to our every other week child advocacy chat. We have a very special conversation today with what we're seeing on the news and with really the turmoil what the world is facing. Oftentimes, kids are forgotten in this conversation, and the impact of kids, obviously, not only what they're facing there in Ukraine and the surrounding countries, but also kids of what they're watching on the news. We wanted to have a conversation today to talk about how to have those conversations with young people and to discuss ways that you can help outside the borders of Oklahoma and with rallying people to understand what's happening. We have three very special individuals that will be on the conversation today, three good friends of mine that I'm very thankful had the time to join us. We'll be joined by Kelsey Walters, Mike Boettcher, and Cheryl Step. I want to go ahead and start with Kelsey and let Kelsey tell you a little bit about her story, and we'll have questions at the end if anyone wants to type questions into the chat. Feel free to, and hopefully we'll have some time to hop on at the end. Alex, I saw you just hopped on. Are y'all on a time schedule? Do you need to go now, or would you like to go at the end? Alex? You're unmuted, but I can't hear anything, Alex. Oh. Alex, do you need to go now, or do you need to go at the end? You're muted now. There you are.
I can go whenever. I apologize. Wi-Fi is rough. That's all I got. But yeah, I can go now or at the end. I really don't have much. Just going to give a brief overview. So
if it's all right with our other three speakers, we'll let Alex just give a quick Capitol update of what's happening. It's slow at the Capitol, so go ahead and turn it over and just let you give an update of what's happening with some of the bills.
Yep, it is slow. We just finished our first week with committees back on the other side of the chamber. So we have switched now. Bills started in the House, have not gone to the Senate. Bills started in the Senate, have gone to the House, or they've died and they're no longer around. Last week, the House really canceled all of their committee meetings. So the Senate had a few, but still pretty small agendas. So this will be the first week of real committee meetings. They're kicking off today. Of note, Senate Public Safety is meeting today, and they are hearing House Bill 1616, which is the Hope Schaefer Act that we are really excited to get to work on with OICA. Important bill relating to student drivers in the backseat of cars, student drivers and then passengers in the backseat of the car, keeping our kids safe in the state. So we're happy to work on that today in Senate Public Safety. And then, so bills have until the 14th to make it out of their committee. If it's a Senate bill coming over to the House, it's double assigned to appropriations and budget. They get an extra week. So if they have a fiscal impact to the state, they get a little bit more time to decide how they feel about those. But everything else has to be heard by the 14th for it to survive the deadline. We are down to around 1,000 bills left, as opposed to the 5,000 almost we had starting. So we are really whittling it down, thank goodness, and getting towards the end. We're just past the halfway point in session, and so things are moving, and stuff that is around now is looking promising or looking like they're going to hit a wall. So that's kind of my Capitol update, again to the 14th for bills to pass committee, and then they'll have a couple of weeks to be heard on the floor and then either sent back over or go to conference. So that's all I have, unless there's anything else, Joe, Peyton, anybody that you'd like me to highlight.
I do want to remind people there are 2 days at the Capitol this week too. Oklahoma Partnership on School Readiness has a day at the Capitol on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, Potts Family Foundation and other organizations have been working to recognize ACEs and PACEs and the work that's being done. So I want to encourage folks to come out to the Capitol on Thursday morning when the resolutions are run in the House and the Senate. If you want to learn more how to engage with that, I'll put my email in the chat and feel free to reach out to me. Oh, thank you, Alex. I knew it was going to be brief because it's going to be another slow week.
Not a lot happening. Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Now I want to get to the program. I've already introduced our three special speakers today. First on our list is a friend of mine from going back to early days in college, her college career, and work in politics. And then she's moved on to work in the business sector and has a very interesting, unique story that I know she wants to share. And I'm going to turn this over to Kelsey Walters. Kelsey?
Thank you, Joe. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you just fine.
Just have to check. This is my first Zoom call now established from Canute, Oklahoma. We're at the makeshift office. Typically, I'm joining a Zoom call also with 27 or more participants from the Republic of Moldova, where I have been working for the United States Agency for International Development, along with running our family's 6,000 acre commercial farm there, which my husband is still there as we prepare for spring sunflower and corn planting this week. So maybe many of you know, but if not, I'll kind of do just a brief overview. A couple of weeks ago, my daughters and I left Republic of Moldova, where we've been living for about 10 years, and came back to Oklahoma seeking stability, and predominantly our concern was for our children. My daughters are 8 and 3 years old. And it just, the situation, as you see on TV, as we all monitor and watch, is just highly volatile. We seek peace, and we all hope that these continued conversations about ceasefire or neutrality, or at least, evacuation of certain cities, providing these humanitarian convoys to get people out of besieged cities, will have fruit. Unfortunately, as we see, it continues to, Ukraine continues to be attacked, and we continue to see the horrors of the Russian invasion. So we are here on my family's farm and ranch out in Canute, Oklahoma. I hope my also internet connection supports our call this afternoon. It's a bit touch and go as I try to jump back into professional sector. Joe, thank you for the introduction and for the invitation to participate today. And I'll just go ahead and pass the baton back over to somebody else in the panel and anticipate questions in a robust dialogue as we move forward.
Next, I want to turn it over to Mike Boettcher. Mike has been a friend for quite a while and has had 4 decades in covering war-torn countries through the different news outlets, and is just one of our shining jewels, who's taken his experience and knowledge to the University of Oklahoma to help educate a future generation of journalists. Mike, wanted to turn this over to you a little bit and just talk about some of your experiences of what you've seen and how this impacts families, not only on the ground, but also with coverage, and how individuals, from what they see, how it certainly can impact folks that are far away from a conflict. Oh, you're muted, Mike.
Thank you, Joe. As you said, I've spent the better part of 4 decades covering these kinds of stories, and possibly will, after this term ends at OU, will possibly be heading towards Ukraine. I'm on standby for ABC once I get done to do this. It is war is a family killer, but it also makes families very strong. And I've seen over the course of years, whether it was the wars in Central America, wars in Africa, wars in Asia, pro-democracy, protests in China, wars in Europe and the Balkans. I've seen what it's done to children. And that's what really kills me, and something I've never been able to get out of my mind, since, I think the most devastating thing to me that still wakes me up in the middle of the night sometimes was in 1982, the Sabra and Shatila massacre after the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in that year, and the thousands who were killed in those camps, including children, and seeing those children who frankly were murdered by a quote unquote Christian militia. Over the course of time, I'd like to say in this current crisis the globe finds itself in, I was there at the birth of the baby. You know, my job from 1988 to 1992 was to cover the fall of the Soviet Empire and the East Bloc and the demolition of the Iron Curtain. And I was based both in Berlin and Warsaw, spent considerable time in Ukraine and in Moscow. And, you know, I go back to the joy that I felt that night when the wall fell on November 19th, 1989. And I was with the East Berliners on the east side of the Brandenburg Gate when they charged the wall. And to see the wall crumble in front of my eyes, as being a child who grew up in the Cold War doing duck and cover drills in the early 1960s during the Cuban Missile Crisis, I felt great joy. A few days later, I was in Dresden, which was really the heart of the pro-democracy movement in East Germany. And East Germany still existed at that point. And I was with protesters who went into the East German secret police headquarters to basically take it over. And they also, once they got inside, no one stopped them, and they started going to the secret files looking for their particular personal file. And then they turned their attention to across the street to the Soviet embassy. And there was a shorter man who came out of the building agitated. And I have a vague memory of that. I remember going to the Soviet embassy across the way, and that man was Vladimir Putin, now going back in history. And he was a KGB officer in the old Soviet intelligence apparatus who was assigned to Dresden. And he had called Moscow to try to get permission for his Soviet guards to open fire with live ammunition on those East German protesters. Well, Moscow was silent, and the rest is history. That fell. As joyous as I was during that time period, he was equally crushed. So I think I have a sense of what's in his head in terms of trying to bring back the old Soviet empire, because that was a crushing day for him and for the old line Soviets. But, you know, to see on, you know, as it fell, and children who had lived behind the Iron Curtain with their parents being able to enjoy the things that they couldn't enjoy in the East when they went to West Berlin and West Germany, and it all became one nation, and there was economic development, and there would be good jobs for these children when they grew up. But I also look back when I think of the impacts of children to my time in Baghdad. And I was the target of a dual suicide bombing. A 1,000-pound truck bomb and a 2,000-pound truck bomb came after the NBC News compound because of a story we'd done on a torture chamber one of these groups that had been labeled as a terrorist group was using at that time. And this was revenge. Well, we survived. I was hurt, but we survived. But across the way in the apartment building, it had completely collapsed. And inside of that building were a lot of children. Because in the middle of a war zone, you look towards children for normality, basically. You know, that was the one thing that kept me sane, the fact that we kind of adopted these children who lived in our Baghdad neighborhood and, you know, bought soccer uniforms and goals and balls and helped sponsor their soccer league. And then two bombs that were intended for me, killed most of them. And it's something I've never been able to get over. And, you know, I know the psychological impact of covering things like that for decades. It's had a dramatic psychological impact on me. I mean, if you look at post-traumatic stress in the dictionary, you'll see my picture next to it. And and so, you know, I think, you know, I try to put myself in the shoes of these children in Ukraine right now and what they might be feeling and the disorientation that's going on. And I've seen this going on for decades. Children are very resilient, but still, this is something that will impact their lives for the rest of their lives. And I think this is a very valuable discussion to have, what sort of impacts that has on the children there and our children here watching this from afar.
Thank you, Mike. And next I want to turn over to Cheryl Step. Cheryl is a phenomenal Oklahoman that we have working to try and promote better health and mental health, brain health issues for children, and just the work she's doing is amazing. And I asked her to come on here to talk a little bit about what we're seeing and to discuss some suggestions on what we can do to have these conversations with kids about what we're facing.
I really appreciate what Mike was talking about, especially at the end, that it very much does have an impact. Yes, children are resilient if they have good supports and good resources to help them do that. But what brain science is really telling us is that even in the womb and infants, when they are exposed to violence and trauma, especially on this day-to-day basis, like these children are, that we very much know that it is impacting different parts of their brain and their brain development, because we're all built for survival. And so if that part of your brain really needs to be on high alert a lot of the time, then that's the part of the brain that's going to get really tight neural connections. And going back to just thinking about the stress of it, even as adults, I know I've been on multiple calls lately where people are saying, I have to turn the news off. I can't do it, because it's that the stress comes from the unpredictability, the idea that we're in this circumstance and we're not sure how it's going to turn out. So that can happen by watching things on the news, or just even having an overwhelming workload and you're not sure how it's all going to come out. That unpredictability builds that stress. And when we have that stress and sometimes it develops into a fear or a threat, that's when our brain really kicks in that, hey, this is something that's threatening to your body. So we need to shift into a different part of our brain. We need to shift into that fight, flight, or freeze piece, and staying in that. Our body's used to staying in that for about 20 minutes. It's designed to stay in that for 20 minutes. But when you're in that realm of your brain for a very long time, it has a profound impact on your brain development and your body systems. And the adverse childhood experiences study shows that that has long-term effects into adulthood. And so the idea is to really try to find this balance between having those positive experiences like Mike talked about, having a soccer team, building some cohesion with the people that you're with. That's what I love watching the end pieces of the news when they do the feel-good pieces, where I remember one little girl standing and singing Let It Go, or one of the songs from Disney, and everyone down in that bunker was listening to her and cheered for her. That's a positive experience that's going to help her deal with the negative impact of all the other traumas that she's going through. And so as adults, even watching it, we have to kind of have this balance between how much knowledge do we want and how much stress are we really able to take into our body. And so I think about that when people say, how do we help our kids watch this? Well, first, as an adult, they say you have to put that oxygen mask on first. You have to make sure you're ready. You have to have the time and the space available. If you're going to sit with children to adolescents, even some young adults, if you're going to sit and watch the news with them, you don't want to do it while you're doing something. If they have a comment or question, you push them off. It needs to be a time when you can really spend some time and some space with them, and knowing that you have the ability to do that. You don't want to join in their chaos, right? You want to share your calm as you're doing it. And so I think if you're watching something and it's increasing your stress level or your emotions, your worry or your sadness, it's going to do that most likely for your children too. And they do mirror our emotions also. So I think the big piece is to know your child and kind of their threshold. And so I don't say there's necessarily an age, there's a stage. You have to look at stage, not age. So your stage is really that the children understand time and space. I know I have a 3.5-year-old grandchild, and she'll get on FaceTime and she'll say, Oma, come to my house now. And she's in San Diego, and she doesn't have that time or space. She doesn't understand that she can see me here and I can't be there. And so if you're showing them images of something that's across the world and you say that's far away, well, it might have been the week before you said, we can't go see your friend because they're too far away. Okay, so they have to understand the time and space dimension to really be able to understand it. And I think knowing their background, if a child has a history of violence or a history of abandonment or hunger, that the images are going to trigger some of that too, because all of our emotional impulses and things and reactions in our brain are linked to our senses and to our memories. So I think it's really important to kind of choose the right time and the right place and the right people to watch the TV shows with. But what I really, really want to emphasize is that it's so important when you're sitting with a child or maybe even another adult that expresses their opinion. Maybe I'm really worried when I see this, or it's scary when I see this. Our impulse as an adult is to take that fear away and say, oh, well, you don't need to be worried. Mom and dad are here. But what we really, really need to do first is we need to validate that emotion for them. We need to be able to say, it is scary. It makes sense that you're scared. It makes sense that you're worried. Because when we do that validation, we're creating a connection and a relationship where they know that we hear them and we understand them. And that is a huge protective factor. So you want to build this really safe relationship and connection with your child to bring that safety into this conversation. And then really try to sit and have a conversation. You might need to go take a walk. You might need to, if you're doing breathing techniques already with your children, do something to bring a little bit more calm, because we know we can't think here if our emotions are high or our fight or flight is activated in the back of our brain. So if they're really going to have a conversation, they have to be fairly calm to do it, and so do you. But then really looking for the strengths, like Mike was talking about, the resilience that we see. When you're watching that on TV, what do you see that is giving them some strength? Well, they're all working together and they're all supporting each other, right? And so what are our strengths here at home? What are some strengths that we have here at home? And build on those strengths to help build that safety again. Safety and belonging are the key piece here.
And Kelsey, you've lived something that fortunately Americans haven't had to experience. So just fear of what's happening on the border next to you, with what might spill over into your own country where you're living at. You had to move your daughters to a safe space. You and I've talked about this. You wanted to make sure that they were safe now, because if something were to happen, if Ukraine were to fall and then the next move into Moldova, you wanted to do what you could to protect them. What are some of the things that, if you don't mind talking about this, some of the things you've experienced with your own two daughters and sharing some of these stories and explaining the situation? And they're in a different situation now. They're watching what's happening close to home. And I know they're probably worried about their dad. Just what are some of the things you're talking to with your girls?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And I really appreciate Cheryl's commentary, because it really, it puts into definite terms those things that we kind of know in the back of our minds, but we don't, really talk about. And I was taking notes as she was talking, and I think, unpredictability for us is really hard, because we don't know when we're going to go back to Moldova. We're not able to predict that. I'm not able to predict that. So that's difficult for me to come to terms with, to try to figure out what we do next week and what we do in 3 weeks. And but it's also difficult for them to understand, are we going to be home for Easter? Are we going to, how are we going to celebrate, daddy's birthday in 2 weeks? So the traditional things that we do all the time, there's that sense of unpredictability. We're probably not going to be able to do those this year, but are we going to be doing things in the fall? And that's still, it's hard for them to come to terms with that piece of unpredictability. For us, it's a little bit more simple, because we traditionally come back to Oklahoma twice a year, so they have a sense of safety and stability here, which is why one of the reasons that we left, because those elements in Moldova were evaporating for us. Predictability, we didn't have that in Moldova. Safety, we felt safe in terms of, today, but also unpredictability, what's going to happen tomorrow or next week. Ukraine essentially is fighting for Moldova, because Moldova has no other security assurance from NATO or from the US or from any other countries. And so Ukraine in essence is fighting for Moldova, and So that in a way, there's just an unpredictable sense of what comes next. When we were in Moldova, my children are out, we live in an apartment, so down in the courtyard or in the park, more and more the children in the playground were more and more Ukrainian children. And so we could tell when they had just come into Moldova because they wouldn't be playing. I mean, they were really tightly grouped around, the parental figure, the mother, the grandmother, and they had lost that sense of play. They were so removed from, time and space awareness that they had no desire to play. And so then maybe after a couple of days, they would start to warm up to the fact that they felt more safe in Chisinau. They had found some people to speak Ukrainian or Russian with. They had figured out where they could maybe buy candy, just normalcy in their lives. They had found a couple of elements that really helped anchor them. And so then they began to play more and more. But, explaining to my kids why these kids aren't playing, it's, for a child to see another child who's gone through a very traumatic event, who's been traumatized, and explain to them why that child is acting that way or why they're like that is also for my children, I think, a great moment to make a connection and to explain to them how they can help. I think we all, not only adults, but also children, want to be able to be helpful. And so, bringing extra candy with us when we go out to the playground to try to share, to try to give them, a happy moment, is a way that we can give back in a way. But then, I guess now in Oklahoma, there's so few people that have had the experience that we've had that I think my daughters in a couple of months will start to ask, really the question, now the excitement's over. Now we're into day-to-day life. What just happened? So, and I don't have the answers, but I think talking about it through forums like this and trying to exchange experiences is really helpful as we all are trying to explain to kids how they can take what they're seeing on TV and be helpful or be proactive and balance out the violence with something that might be a silver lining.
Mike, I know that you have to have that standard where whatever you broadcast, you want it to be factual, you want it to tell the story, but also you have to be careful what you post, just knowing that some of these things will probably be too graphic. What do you look at when you're there in the field working on issues like this? What's your standard for what you cover?
Well, certainly all networks have, and I worked for CNN for 10 years, NBC for 20, and ABC for a decade. And we all pretty much have the same standards. And the difficulty in those standards and not being too graphic is that you run the risk of sanitizing a war and not showing the actual brutality of it. What I see in my eyes in person as we're documenting this are scenes that will never leave my mind as long as I live. You don't see all of that here. Now, looking at the images that you're seeing coming from the Kyiv northern suburbs of those people executed and those trenches dug with hundreds of dead Ukrainians, men, women, children put in those mass graves. Those sorts of images are as graphic as it's going to get, and that is incredibly graphic. And I think showing those, showing that people with their hands tied behind their back, there are ways that we shoot that. We don't videotape the bullet holes, and there's blood everywhere normally, and you can't get away from that. And we don't show the faces. But I think it's incredibly important that we don't over sanitize what this is all about. This is barbarity. You know, I covered wars all of my life, all of my adult life. I hate war. And maybe it's just my own rationalization in my head why I covered it, but I covered it because I wanted to show the brutality of it so that people would think twice before they go into a war and a conflict. And, you know, that's why I spent 2 years in Afghanistan, because, you know, young people just aren't in elementary school, junior high or high school. They are high schoolers who just graduated wearing uniforms now and holding weapons and killing each other. And so those are children too. You could call them young adults, but they're not fully formed yet. And one of the things that really concerns me is seeing the effects that this has on the development of that child as they grow older. I can remember when I was based in South Africa during the huge apartheid protests, and I was in the eastern part in Natal province in KwaZulu, and I can remember a 13-year-old boy holding a sharpened screwdriver to my throat, and he was going to punch it through. And I, you know, gently tried to talk to him and said, you know, yeah, I'm not your enemy here. But the fact is, he had grown up with violence and protest his entire life and was conditioned to that, where he had made a weapon out of his Phillips screwdriver and was on the verge of killing someone, namely me. Now, we've seen war generations grow up and do great things. All you have to do is look at Western Europe after World War II. But that came with a lot of assistance in the Marshall Plan from the West, and close family units that you would find in Western Europe helping each other. But there are other places in the world where generations of warfare have really just destroyed any hope for a childhood kids have had. I look at Afghanistan, as well as what happened in South Africa way back then. But Afghanistan was a case where that's all they knew really was violence and picking up a weapon and fighting whichever foreign invader it was this year. You know, whether it was the Soviet Union in previous days or the United States up until recently, or even elements of Al Qaeda that, you know, the Northern Alliance fought. So, you know, I think one of the things to really look at as we go through all of this in Ukraine, and it's far from over, but is how much we're talking about ammunition and weapons and fighter jets and artillery and stingers and javelin missiles. We're sending all of that there. We got to be ready, and we're bad at this as a nation. We got to be ready after the war is over to come in there with therapists and psychologists and psychiatrists and all the help we can do for the population of Ukraine that has endured this, and specifically the children. And what happens after the whole, you know, war ends and people are watching it, no one wants to stay around for the recovery. They surely didn't after 2001, when the US went into Afghanistan and we were going to help rebuild this democratic nation and try to drive corruption out of the system. Well, the simple fact of the matter is, you know, we turned our attention to Iraq and we didn't provide that kind of help. And you look at what happened last fall, eventually in Afghanistan. So look, I mean, we can watch all of this now and it's horrific, but we need to keep this front and center as an issue once this war has been completed one way or the other, and be there with all the help that these children need to try to help them live as normal as a life as they can, because they are the future leaders.
Oh, Mike, thank you. Cheryl, we've seen a lot of conversations happen. Of course, we've taken in our share of refugees here in the state of Oklahoma over the last couple of months. People are having probably as difficult a time talking to kids about what's happening there, about individuals moving to our country and explain that situation. We've seen a lot of rhetoric. I saw on a commercial just this morning people attacking refugee status. What are some things that you would recommend people talk to their kids about? I mean, with what they're seeing on the news, with what we're experiencing, maybe their neighbor might be a refugee. I mean, it's really hard to tell in this world these days. What are some points you would like to recommend?
I think a thing that will really help with understanding goes a little bit back to what Mike and Ms. Walters were talking about, and that is the whole idea that we adapt to our environment for survival. So these refugee kids might come in and, like she's saying, they might really hold to themselves at first because they don't feel safe. We adapt to our environment, and our behaviors become a piece of our system, our safety system within our body. So we have to be able to understand that they've been in a very unsafe place. So we might see either withdrawal. We can see that sometimes where, you know, they're very much clinging and withdrawn from other people because they don't feel safe. Or we see what Mike was talking about, the hypervigilant, the, you know, ever ready, the impulsiveness, because that's how they've had to survive. So I think teaching families and communities and our children about that piece of it, you know, they might have different behaviors in you because that's what they needed to survive in that place. Even though they're in a safe place now, those are wired into their body, right? That's how they interact with people. And it will take a series of really good trusting relationships. I love the sharing candy and giving them some space, but inviting them to play. And by the way, there's I listened to some really great trauma trainers during COVID, and one of them was somebody that is on the ground with children in places like Haiti and things like that have had devastating traumas. And he said, you know that you're getting through with the kids when they start to play, because we can't play until we feel safe. And so when the kids are starting to play, then they're starting to feel a little bit more safe. But I think understanding where they've come from, and that because they're from this place that had so much violence and uncertainty, that they are either going to withdraw and it's going to be difficult to draw them out, or they might be, you know, kind of in your face, impulsive, and that we just have to give them the grace from that. And again, validating those emotions. You know, are you scared right now? It makes sense that you'd be scared right now. You're in with a group of kids that you haven't been with before. And I think that's not only important for families and children, but I think as a community, and as we go back into these countries, I'm hoping that some of this work with self-healing communities and adverse childhood experiences comes into play. And Harvard University does a great job with this, just really talking about, yeah, we do need psychologists and psychologists, don't get me wrong, but what we have to help those communities do is rebuild their connections with themselves and feel like they are supporting each other and they have support from other places and resources from other places. That's the difference between tolerable stress and toxic stress. It's tolerable if you have a good support system and you have some resources. And I think that's where we see the resilience. When we see these people in the basements and the bomb shelters, they've got each other, they're relying on each other, they have a few resources coming in for food. And so they can be collectively helping each other. I call it collective well-being, but they can really help each other in that situation. But when you're pulled away from the people, the safety, so people coming here, refugees coming here, and maybe they're, even though they were in a bomb shelter, they're now separated from people that they're really familiar with, they're going to go back into those triggering impacts of being in a traumatic space. And we need to have patience, and we need to have empathy, and we need to just share them a lot of support and resources and belonging, help them feel like they belong.
And follow up on that, basically everything I'm hearing from you on this is the same thing I've heard about adverse childhood experiences and how we deal with toxic trauma with kids, no matter what situation they've been in. And so it sounds like it's the same advice for dealing with a child who may have been in a highly toxic home life, even here in Oklahoma.
Yes, very much so. I mean, our brains are wired the same way. And so the more adverse experiences we have that are difficult to handle, the more we're going to develop the brain neurons in our midbrain and our survival brain. The survivor brain is where that fight, flight, or freeze gets activated. And so our brain, where it fires, it wires together. So children that have been brought up or spent a long amount of time, and sometimes children going up, they say all the way up to, you know, late 20s, early 30s, children, our brains are still developing. And so the other piece to this is that children that have been raised with a lot of trauma like that for over a long period of time, the neural connections in this thinking part of our brain are part of our brain where we can make decisions, where we have inhibitory control, self-control, where we know how to control our emotions and things like that. These neural connections don't even develop as well because our brain has prioritized survival in the back part of our brain. And so they're going to need help with working memory and with flexible thinking and with inhibitory control and understanding their emotions and things like that. So yes, it's the same for children that have been raised in a chaotic environment day after day. Of course, the impact of it might be a little bit stronger in one place or the other, but you have to look at the support system. If they felt all alone in a family situation with absolutely no adult in their life whatsoever and maybe scraps for food for 2 years, but then they've been in a bomb shelter and they've been surrounded by people that love them and they do have moments to play and they have incoming food. I mean, it's so hard to understand and balance these adversities with the positive experiences. That's what it's all about.
You know, Joe, one of the ways that I dealt with this, which wasn't the right way, but you know, earlier on in my career, is every bad thing I saw, I would lock it away in the back of my brain somewhere. I don't know where, but I do everything I could to suppress it. And at some point, you can have that lockbox there, but something will happen. And for me, it was the suicide bombing I was in and digging through the rubble of that apartment building, trying to get these kids out of there who had all died. And then that vault you have holding all those bad experiences breaks open. And it takes professional help to be able to recover from that. And that's what I worry about the children. You know, there's the suppression of what they have seen. At some point, unless they're given the mechanisms to work with this and explaining this to them, at some point this will erupt. And what this does is, and it's done it to the history of humankind, it perpetuates violence. You've lived violence, you've seen it, and then you inflict it on others later on in your life. That's precisely at the beginning of my comments. I talked about the Sovereign Shatila massacre of Muslims by a Christian militia. That was in retaliation for a massacre of Christians by Muslims 10 years earlier in Lebanon. And so, and that's why, you know, psychiatry is not just some sort of abstract help that would be nice if we could get them counseling. It is essential, really, for the survival of humankind. Otherwise, we're going to keep killing each other. And frankly, as a guy who's covered war all of his life, you know, just showing the images and trying to, you know, get people to not want to go down this path by showing how brutal war actually is. Well, you know something, that hasn't worked, at least in my lifetime. And so we need to find other ways to break humankind's cycle of violence. And certainly a key piece of this is counseling.
Mike, I can't imagine what you've seen and what you've had to deal with and what you were just talking about. The TV show Jack Ryan, I don't know if that hits too close to home or you watched that, but the first season of that started off with a young person who has lost his entire family from a bombing, and then he grew up to be a terrorist himself. It perpetuates itself, and that's where we've got to try and come up with a way to find better answers and hopefully more diplomats and less aggression. I'll go ahead and do one last round of questions. I'll go ahead and stay with you, Mike. What would you recommend with all the things you've seen and with your coverage? What should people try and pay attention to the most, and how can they take what they're watching and try and turn that into something good?
You know, in terms of watching with your children, you know, my opinion, and I'll let the experts talk on this. I'm not an expert in that field, but if it was my own children, you know, I would be wary of overdosing them with pictures of the brutality of this war. Certainly that it's there, and then you know, I think some of the most eloquent speakers in this war, and that's what I tune my kids to, and they're seeing this on social media, not just on linear television like I work for. But you know, they're seeing children with stories and how they survived, and I think those sorts of stories are effective, and our children should see that, because that is someone who looks like them, and they're going to be listening to that person, not to what a grown-up is, or seeing you know, bodies in the street or mass graves, which I think is just too much for children to see. But I think that it's important. And look, I'm an international affairs guy. I'm sitting here talking to you now in one of my offices at OU, which is at the Center for Intelligence and National Security, which I'm a senior fellow at. You know, now I lost my track. I'm turning into an old man here, but right in front of your eyes.
This is a tough topic.
Yeah, no, it is. And I think that, I know what I was going to say is, I think it's important to that you open up the eyes of your children as they're developing, and open them up to what's going on elsewhere in the world, though, that they don't live in a vacuum here in Oklahoma. And I think sometimes in our school districts across the country and in this state, we don't pay enough attention to what's happening, and you know, teaching what other parts of the world face, so that our children can be more prepared as adults when they grow up to, you know, to want to learn more about these sorts of issues. You know, and it goes back to education every single time. And that's why we need to pour more resources into that. I mean, at the University of Oklahoma, in my journalism classes at Gaylord College, I spend, you know, even though maybe 1 out of 500 of those kids that may have graduated under me in the 10 years I've been back at OU will go on to work overseas to cover conflict, probably for far less than that even. And but I sit down to all of them and talk to them about global affairs and what's going on in the news. And these are college students, because it's education and information that can really nudge humankind in the right direction. And, you know, we're not in the right direction right now. But the more we understand each other, the more we understand each other's problems, desires, wishes, and how each other lives in their particular country or region of the world, the better off we are in the human race. And it all starts with education, and that has everything to do, as you know, Joe, about childhood.
And Cheryl, I noticed you posted a link here. I wanted to come back to you. Are there any recommendations you have for further reading, for resources people might want to have a talk with their kids? And you have to even think about it. This generation, even some of the parents have never had that specter of war hanging over them. I was raised in that era where you always had that lingering doubt of if the USSR would drop a bomb on us. I mean, we had to do those drills in the classroom to crawl under our desk as if that was going to save us from an attack. But we were conditioned from birth to know that there's an enemy that may attack us. We haven't had that in the last 20 or 30 years. So some of these, even young parents may be even dealing with some of these issues.
I think so, very much so. And I think it comes back, like Mike was saying, it comes back to education so we do understand when we feel a threat like that it's biological and that reaction is biological, and how do we as adults around children maintain our calm for them, but also process it with them. Just like he was saying, being able to have a space where they can talk about it and feel safe, that they can say, I was scared or I was worried or whatever. That's really very important. And that knowledge for the parents to understand how to help and build those positive experiences for the kids helps mitigate the negative. So the PACES Connection, Raising Resilient Oklahomans, is PACES Connection is a worldwide website. It just started few years before the pandemic, but really grew during the pandemic. And it's a group of really brilliant people that come together. Some are parents, some are researchers, and share information about adverse childhood experiences and how we can build up positive experience in children's lives to mitigate those adversities. Because you can't live without adversities. It's going to happen. That's part of life, right? There's the ups and the downs. The other piece that I'll send now is the Developing Child Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University has great videos, real short 2, 3, 4 minute videos if parents want to just kind of watch those and get the idea of kind of this balancing act and how trauma impacts the brains of their child over the years and as they grow older. And I think if you really want to dive in as a parent, you read the new book, What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. It's a great conversation that leads you through the brain science of what the systemic trauma, like war, the impacts that has not only in the child's life, but as you're saying, through the generations, and that we've got to break that cycle so that we can bring about more collective well-being and people that feel like there's a sense of belonging instead of them and us, that we can really kind of bring that together. But Dr. Bruce Perry's he's come to Oklahoma a few times, and he just does a brilliant job explaining the different facets of the brain and how that relates to our life.
Thank you. And Linda just posted an article too. I know Linda is very active with PACES Connection, also with the Potts Family Foundation. So thank you for posting that, Linda. Kelsey, I want to close out with you, and then we'll open it up for questions. I know you are trying to raise awareness about what's happening and doing your part. Do you have any places where individuals can go to help make a difference or show support?
Thanks, Joe. This is all very dynamic right now. In the Republic of Moldova, such a small country, we've received a phenomenal number of refugees, refugee families, mostly women and children. Some say the largest percentage per population of any of the countries who are receiving refugees right now. So our state resources are very limited prior to war, and now in this very poor country, even more drawn more thinly as they try to support, over 100,000 refugees who are staying medium and long term, I think, with that aspect of unknown. So yes, Joe, actually my friends who work in the U.S. Embassy, and we're all in the Parent Teacher Association there in Chisinau, Moldova together, and they've with their connections will be setting up what's called the Sunflower Center in Chisinau, which is a center for psychological counseling and support for mothers and a safe space for children. And they're developing it right now as they're trying to bridge providing immediate basic needs of food, hygiene, blankets, to examining that what comes next is really taking these mothers who are just on the verge of tears and the children who are not playing and giving them access to resources to address that second and very critical element of mental health, so that they can start to create safe spaces and connections perhaps with other refugees as they build a new community until they're able to go back or examine what comes next in life. So once we have more information about how donations can be made, I can share that information with you right now. I have and will continue to post information about donations on, I have a website, kelseywalters.com/donate, where I'll continue to update with information about the best organizations and activities and actions on the ground in Moldova, not new organizations, but long-term vetted organizations that have really demonstrated their salt. I think I'd like to just kind of follow up with what Cheryl said. What we've done with my daughters is, and we've seen there's a balance between like kind of what Mike and Cheryl have said. I absolutely want as much raw information on the news as I can find. I want to see what's going on. I, as an adult and as a mother of my children, want to assess my risk. And I need to see what's going on. And when the Moldovan government was purposely holding back information, that made me even more anxious. And they were doing that to limit panic. But the problem is if you're an educated adult and you understand that you may be at risk, you want to know what's going on. And I don't want to see it sanitized, but I don't want my children to see that. So we try to keep them, we try to watch the news kind of secluded. We try to watch it on my telephone, so it's not broadcast to the family. We keep Disney Channel on the TV, and then I'm consuming the news through my mobile device. But then we also ask, hey, Evie, what have you been hearing? I know you're hearing things on the bus because you're in you speak 3 languages. You can hear what kids are talking about. You kind of see what's going on. You see us concerned. You see other people talking about it. And then, she's able to kind of provide some insight. But we ask, what have you been hearing? And then I let her lead with questions because I know that she's been exposed, but I also don't want to plant anxiety where it hasn't already been. So those are a couple things to follow up. Joe, I'm happy to accept questions if there are any questions.
I want to go ahead and open it up if anyone has any questions. Now's the time. Forever hold your peace.
I'm gonna put into chat too a little plug for neuroscience, Joe. I coordinate through Potts Family Foundation. I coordinate a training across Oklahoma called Neuroscience, which is neurobiology, epigenetics, ACEs study, and resilience. And I'm gonna put a little chat in the chat, just a blog that I wrote when we were first going through the training with Laura Porter and Dr. Rob Anda. And it's a no charge for us to come to any size group within, can be a parent group, it can be a religious affiliation, it can be an agency, and we'll explain a little bit more about how trauma does impact the brain and body and behaviors and lifetime of people.
And Linda, do you want to give a plug for Thursday before we get finished up?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? I'm on my phone and I never know how to find the right button. Yeah, it's there will be a resolution heard in the House and the Senate. Representative Carol Bush on the House side is carrying the resolution, just naming ACEs and PACEs Awareness Day, first of its kind, I think, for Oklahoma in raising awareness. We, instead of trauma awareness, we were trying to put the positive spin on the protective factors, especially. And the House side will be at 9:30. So if there are groups there, if you'll let me know or let Joe know, and he can let me know, then we can ask Carol Bush to recognize the groups of people that are there. I'm hoping on the Senate side, we'll be able to have some time to run over and have it heard over there, be able to be there when it's heard there. Senators Carrie Hicks and Brenda Stanley, who are the caucus co-chairs on the Senate side for the Early Childhood Legislative Caucus, are carrying it there. So I have some social media images that could be shared on Facebook and Twitter. You can email me if you're interested in those at lmanagh, MANAUGH, at pottsfamilyfoundation.org, and I can send those to you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Linda. Hope to see a crowd there. Also, I just want to thank our three speakers today. We put this together late last week. We thought this conversation was something that people needed to hear, especially with everything that is going on, the continual coverage. Just thank the three of you for being willing and able to speak. Kelsey and Mike, I want you both to be safe when you head back over that way. And we need y'all's voices out there. So thank you for everything you're doing to speak up on this, because I know this isn't an easy conversation. And Cheryl, thank you for talking about the science behind this and offering those recommendations and giving people some great advice on how to handle these conversations. And if no one else has anything else, we will see